Okay, so in order to make up for the time that we missed on Monday with the snow day, we are going to, I'm having you do this introduction to Punnett squares at home. And so you can do the practice and do the homework together. So this is going to be a review for most of you all, but we're still going to keep track of it. Okay, so first of all, Punnett squares is used to predict the probability that a combination of genes will happen in certain offspring of a specific cross of two individuals. So there are specific steps, so we'll work through the steps together. But first, let's review some vocabulary. So the first one is homozygous. We're familiar with that. When you see the term homozygous, you also might see, oh goodness. You also might see pure or purebred, right? You may see that vocabulary, that term used, meaning for homozygous. Next is heterozygous, meaning two. Another word you may see for heterozygous is hybrid. And then finally we have our phenotype and our genotype, and we can remember our song, phenotype and genotype, phenotype and genotype. Phenotype is what you see, genotype is what makes me me. So there are the genes, right? These are the genes. And these, the pH, right, describes their physical traits. It's what you see. So we have our sample problem. In pea plants, red flowers are dominant over white flowers. A heterozygous red flowering plant is allowed to self-pollinate. They ask what the genotype and phenotype probabilities for the offspring of this plant. So step one, identify the important information in the prompt. They want you to underline the information that tells you dominant and recessive. So we have it right here. Red flowers are dominant over white flowers. Then put a box around the text that describes the parent. So here we have a heterozygous red plant is allowed to self-pollinate, which means that both parents are this heterozygous plant, right? If we remember our flower diagram where you had the female part and the male part, right? So if the male part is heterozygous, the female part is also heterozygous because they're part of the same plant. So they have the same DNA, the same genetic makeup, right? And so by self-pollinating, it just means that the pollen from the male part of the plant lands and fertilizes the egg in the female of the same plant. So that means that both parents are heterozygous. Okay? Next, choose a letter to represent the alleles in the cross. So it doesn't matter what letter you use. Normally the letter that we use has to do with the problem that we're talking about. So but it doesn't matter. Normally, bad letters to use are C's because a big C and a little c look alike, or P's because, again, they look alike. R's are good, so we'll use R for this one, for red, and a little r for white because it is the recessive, right? So you use the same letter, just the capital version for dominant, lowercase version for recessive. Next step. Write out the cross using the genotypes of the parents. So since this parent self-pollinated, then we know that both parents are heterozygous. So heterozygous is one capital letter and one lowercase letter. Cross with one capital letter and one lowercase letter. So we go on to page 2. So determine the possible gametes that the parents can produce. Remember that the alleles are segregated. And if you remember from our crossword puzzle, segregated means separate, right? And so mom and dad are both heterozygous. And if you remember how when the gametes are formed, those homologous chromosomes separate. So mom is going to give either a capital R or a lowercase r. And dad is going to give either a dominant trait or a recessive trait, right? So in his sperm is going to be either a capital a dominant or a recessive. And the egg that mom makes is going to have either a dominant trait or a recessive trait. So now we enter the possible gametes for the parents down the sides of the Punnett square. So we have to fill everything out. First, our key. Remember, we gave a capital letter to our dominant trait and a lowercase of the same letter to our recessive trait. And our cross, since both parents were heterozygous, our cross is heterozygous crossed with heterozygous. I apologize. So I think it's easier just to always draw the first parent that you write on the left-hand side and always draw the second parent, put the second parent on the top of the key just so that you're always clear about what's going on. So let's put this parent here. And I'm actually going to change the color of the second parent just so that we can see what's happening with the alleles. So this is like a cross multiplication or like a times table, where this R is going to be shown all the way across. So we're going to take this red R and put it in the box immediately to its right and the box on the other side. Again, R, little r, and little r. And I wrote it to the right-hand side just because the recessive allele always goes second. So I just wrote it to the right just in case. So now we're going to take this one. I'm going to change my color pen. So this is this R, and it's going to come down one and then down again. And this R is going to come down one and then down again. Okay? Oh, I jumped ahead. So imagine all of that is the same thing. So we can redo it here. So remember, dominant letter, a capital letter for our dominant trait, a lowercase letter for our recessive trait. Our parents are both heterozygous, so it's going to be heterozygous cross with heterozygous. I'm going to keep my color scheme going with heterozygous. So I'm going to take my second parent and write it on the top, and my first parent and write it on the side. And then we take the big R and all the way over, the little r all the way over. Now for the second parent, we're going to drop its R down and its R down, and the second R down and the second R down. So now we have our probabilities of our genes and probabilities of our traits, our phenotypes. So homozygous dominant, when we think of the genotype, the two letters that describe homozygous dominant, it's going to be two capital letters. Homozygous recessive, two lowercase letters. Heterozygous is one of each. So each of these boxes, and this is something that how we determine the probability. Each of these boxes, there's a chance, a 25% chance that each of these boxes is going to occur, right? Which makes sense, right? 4 quarters equals a whole. So when we look back here, homozygous dominant, we count the boxes. There's only one box that's there, so that's 25%. When we look at homozygous recessive, there's only one box again, so that's 25%. And then heterozygous, there are 2 boxes. So it's 25 plus 25 to give us a total of 50%. And now our phenotype probability. So this is what it looks like. So now we know what red flowers. So red flowers are going to be either homozygous dominant, well, the combination of homozygous dominant and heterozygous, and white flowers are just homozygous recessive. So red flowers, this is red, red, and red, so that is 75%. And our white, there's only one box, so that's 25%. And what you notice about these numbers is that they should always equal up to be 100. So if they don't equal up to be 100, then you have an issue. So now I'm going to give you time to practice the problems, and the next video is going to go over those problems with you.